Welcome back to BadgerBlitz TV, your Rivals.com destination for all things Wisconsin athletics. I'm Matt Perkins, joined once again by BadgerBlitz.com beat writer Donnie Slusher. Great to see you again.
Great to be on, Matt. Thank you for having me.
Of course, man. Of course. You've been out at practice again this week. Since the last time we connected, you've seen a couple more practices. We've had a couple commitments, which we'll be talking about here in a little bit. But first things first, let's get back to the action that's been happening over at Camp Randall the last couple of days. I think one of the most notable developments is seeing an extended presence of Danny O'Neill with the ones. So I want to talk to you a little bit more about that, sort of what you've been seeing there and some of the pros and cons out of that. And also, for some of you guys who've been following the Badgers for a while, at some point, I'm going to call him Danny O'Brien, former Badger quarterback, and I am apologizing for that up front. It is going to happen sometime in the next 6 months. So I'm apologizing for that on the front end. But let's talk first team reps with Danny O'Neill. He was out there. I know you were out watching the other day. So what'd you see out of him, out of the San Diego State transfer?
Well, the biggest thing for the quarterbacks is that their play has kind of been dictated by practice and by the coaches and how they run practice. Or I feel like last year, like the practices were very pass centric, and they would, pass all day, throw deep, like a lot of deep shots. So it wasn't as, so like their performance, like what you saw was what you got. Nowadays, there's certain days where they don't pass that much. There's certain days when they don't have, when it'll be much more first team than second team, or than vice versa. Especially early on, we saw, Fickle talked about how important it was for him to get his starters reps, and because of how many new starters there were and how many new guys that had a real chance to start. And so we saw that early on, and that really benefited Edwards. But O'Neill, he wasn't playing as much, and he wasn't getting into a rhythm. But over these past few practices, he's playing more than he ever has, and it's had a clear effect on his comfort and his confidence. I thought Tuesday's practice was his best and most confident yet. He was taking deep shots, he was converting a lot of them, and he started to look like a more capable quarterback.
So if you had to point to one thing that could be a harbinger of success for him, what do you think that like key trait that he has could be?
I would say the thing that is most clear about him, or the thing that's most special about him, is his speed. He is by far the most athletic quarterback on the roster. At any time they do design runs are a major part of the offense now. Every quarterback's doing them. Billy Edwards, you can kind of tell that he's ran in the past, but he's not like a mobile quarterback. But Danny O'Neill is a guy who seems like he's been a mobile quarterback since he was younger. Probably due to his height, probably due to him being a little bit undersized. He's had to rely on his athleticism a little bit more. So I'd say that's the big thing that's a big separator with O'Neill so far.
Well, one of the big problems with Braden Locke last year was balls batted down the line of scrimmage because of that lack of height. Are we seeing that with him, with O'Neill?
I sent out a tweet yesterday, like my takeaways tweet. I said that like O'Neill had a great day, like despite the passes being batted down. And I knew I probably shouldn't even include that, just because I knew so many people would have been like, oh, that sounds familiar. Oh, I can think of another guy who does that. But I will say,
guy who wears number 18 who does that.
Yeah. And I mean, I will say, yes, it happened. Yes, his height is somewhat of concern, but a lot of those batted balls came on plays that were, where the defenders were pretty much unblocked. The second string offensive line is much worse than the first string offensive line. So I think that has a clear effect on it. But also his mobility does allow him to move out of the pocket, move away from those defenders, and get off passes in the way that Locke just wasn't. Locke just wasn't a very mobile quarterback. So he relied on being in the pocket, but then he couldn't really throw over the pocket. O'Neill, yeah, if he does play, he'll probably see that issue more. But I think his athleticism, it gives him some wiggle room, literally.
Well, let's talk about that first team offensive line. 3 returning starters. And so let's talk about those other 2 positions, starting with the left tackle. Can we put Kevin Haywood in Penn as LT1 on opening day yet?
I think so. I mean, that's a long ways away, but I would be shocked if it wasn't Kevin Haywood. I think that would be a headline. That would be a top news story if he somehow wasn't the starting left tackle. It seems like it's been kind of determined, like ever since he showed up last year in spring camp. Riley Mallman struggled with some injuries last year in offseason camp, and it was Kevin Haywood who stepped in on right tackle. Like they had some other guys that they probably could have put in there, like Ben Shaw, but they decided to put in the freshman. And I mean, I think they see that because of what he brings physically at 6'8", 325, and with some good speed, that he has the potential to be a great Badger, to be one of the great Badger tackles. And it's more about like, well, one, he has to play up to it, which I believe that he has. I think he's played well, but the coaches I've clearly, are clearly taking upon themselves to improve him. I mean, and he's the one guy. I think this is a good thing or a bad thing, but he's the one guy that I see Jeff Grimes and Blazek like pull to the side the most and kind of like give pointers to. And it's not because he sucks, because he doesn't suck, but I mean, it's just very obvious that they care about his development.
That's really interesting. I think that people are obviously excited about his potential because I mean we saw it in the high school American game, we saw it in the high school tape. You look at him physically, like you said, and he looks like he could be another great one in a long lineage of Wisconsin dominant left tackles. But inside at guard, it looks like it's a three-man competition for that right guard spot between Ben Shaw, who you mentioned earlier, Kerry Kadenko, and Emerson Mandel. How's that been shaking out along the offensive line? And who would you guess would be right guard one on opening night?
I would say the first few practices, it was like a different guy every time. Like it was very hard to gauge any sort of hierarchy. I will say JP Benshaw. I know he struggled with some minor injuries. Nothing that's been disclosed by Fickle, but like we've seen him kind of off to the side at certain points. I'd say recently Emerson Mandel and Kerry Kadenko have taken have played more than Benshaw, maybe because of the injuries. But I would say right now, if I had to place a bet, I would say Emerson Mandel.
Interesting.
What was that?
No, interesting. I mean, that would be two second-year players starting on the line.
Emerson, I mean, I think he offers more, physical upside. I would say he's probably a better athlete than Kerry Kadenko, and he's another guy that, I mean, they obviously care about, developing all their offensive linemen. But, last year when, like I said, when Malman went out and then Haywood moved to the starters, they were putting Emerson Mandel out with the second team tackle. So, I mean, this is another guy that they clearly like from high school. They clearly see the athleticism in him. They're trying to coach him up. And I would say, I mean, it's a little bit hard to gauge who's played the best because we'll probably get to the defensive linemen, and that's been a very strange position group. The way that they're handling that, with just the amount of guys and the amount of subbing and the amount of switching and the lack of consistency with the hierarchy that we're seeing out there, it makes it a little bit harder to judge the offensive linemen and especially the interior offensive linemen. But I would say I've been most intrigued by what I've seen from Mandel, and I'd probably place a bet on him to start opening day.
Well, let's talk about that defensive line. There's a lot of guys rotating in. I know that they've been seeing a little bit more of Ernest Willer, who's a guy I've been excited about for a little bit while now, along with a bunch of the transfers. I guess a better question might be to ask who are we not seeing on the defensive line at this point? Because it sounds like we're seeing every warm body getting some reps with some of the top groups.
I would say the big name that I'm surprised that I'm not seeing more of is probably Brandon Lane. He was a guy that was brought in kind of like the spring transfer window last year. He popped up during fall camp, and this was a guy that he played in a very thin and small defensive line room last year. And this is a bigger guy. This is a guy that a lot of us expected that when they picked him up that he can make an immediate impact, especially in a defensive line room that lost James Thompson. So the fact that we didn't see him that much, that raised some red flags. But I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt because he showed up during fall camp, new room. I want to be positive. But this year, I mean, he's just not really maintaining his place, amongst all the returnees because there's so many new guys that they're trying to see what they have out of them. Like someone like Ben Barton, I expect him to play more when the season comes around than maybe I'm seeing right now because he's been with the team for a few years. They kind of know what they know what they have out of him. So I think that maybe that contributes to like Brandon Lane not playing as much, but I also kind of wish that I would see more of him.
Yeah, I'm just very excited about these heavy edges. Mason Rieger is a guy that I think we haven't seen a whole lot of yet in practice, coming off of some injuries. Do you know what the latest with him, and are we going to be seeing any more of him soon?
I mean, because first off, to start practice, we didn't see him at all. He was just off to the
Yeah.
side. He's been wearing a jersey. I would say recent practice, I definitely saw it on Tuesday. I'm not totally sure if it was the first time, but he was out there during walkthroughs. Like at a certain point in practice, like usually in the middle, they'll always like they'll kind of take a break where they'll take off their helmets and just do like 10 minutes or so of just walkthroughs. He's been out there doing walkthroughs with the first team on the edge, but we still haven't seen him play yet. I've not asked Fickle for an update. I believe he's out for spring. But as for some of the other big edges, I've been incredibly you know intrigued by what I've seen from Michael Garner and Corey Walker. I'd say those are the two guys. Those are the two guys in the edge rusher room that are over 290. Um, Again, we've seen them move. We've seen them move so much, so it's hard to gauge. So it's hard to gauge consistency, and to predict whether or not they'll be consistent once the season starts. But those are two guys that have shown a lot of flashes, and especially with their twitch. Like they're obviously big guys, but their athleticism has really jumped out to me.
Yeah, Corey Walker really seems to be the talk of the town. Hearing things from different people talking about him. Bernie and I have talked with a couple of different guys at practice, and he's been a name that's popped up a lot. But one other name that's been popping up from making a lot of plays, which should be no surprise, as he was a big time playmaker in D3, is Matt Jung, the safety, who is now sounds like it rotating in with the ones and start keeping up making some big plays. What's the latest with him and the rest of the safety room?
I would say, well, he's not always rolling in with the ones. The thing about the safety room is strange. The safety room is weird because like the starters have been very consistent. It's been almost always Preston Zachman and Austin Brown, but then we saw Young jump in there at the end of practice. Like play with the first team a little bit. And then Fickle, we talked to him after practice yesterday, and he said that the safety room is far from decided. And he said the safety room is far from decided. But then he also praised Preston Zachman and was like, "Yeah, he's been around here for a few years, so we don't feel the need to see him as much." Which maybe they're just being nice to him, and he and he's going to go down. But maybe I kind of believe him. I believe that Preston Zachman is probably the best safety on the roster. I would feel better about predicting him to start come opening day. But the fact that we saw Young out with the first team shows that maybe the Austin Brown role isn't as decided. And Young, he's like 6'3", 220. He could definitely play that strong safety position. He could play closer to the line, keep Zachman in the back. But it is something that you know the Young point. I will continue to monitor. I'll continue to see. I continue to watch and like for his placement on the teams, but I think him playing with the first team is probably has to do more with the safety, with how open the safety hierarchy is than with Young as like a real chance to be a starter.
Interesting. Yeah, and it's I still feel like it's up in the air where Austin Brown plays the majority of his snaps, whether it's in the slot, if it's in the safety, and however they're going to use that, because we know they can use him in the slot, but also know they've been moving a lot of different guys around into the slot, especially some of the transfers that they've brought in. So it's sort of going to be interesting to see, which five defensive backs, or we should say really like. We know Ricardo Hallman and Nazir Forkran are locks to start, but like, what's the combination of the other three like nominal starters? And I think that's going to be something that's really interesting to see, and sort of how they change out personnel based on down and distance with that, because I could see a lot of rotating players in the defensive backfield more than ever because of that.
Yeah, I mean, and also the DBs. You talked about how like which five. We've seen far less nickel this spring, and we're seeing and we're seeing like more. We're seeing bigger formations and more use of defensive linemen and maybe even extra linebacker out there. I would say the guy who's played the most in the slot is Jameer Latimer, the transfer from Jacksonville State, I believe. And I mean, he's been playing in the slot with the first team mostly, but it's still like only a fraction of the defensive reps are a nickel. I mean, last year Max Lofi was a guy who he kind of established himself as the nickel, and he was out there most of the time, with the rest of the defense. And it goes back to, Fickle also says something about like what they're looking for in a slot cornerback, like whether they're looking more for someone who's like a cover guy or more like another safety. And the way he basically said, like, yeah, like in the past we've gone for more cover guys, but we need a guy who can do it all and who can really tackle. And I think that's him learning from the Max Lofi situation, because Lofi seemed like a lock to be a starter. He was starting all throughout spring, and then he didn't play as much, when the season actually began. And it probably also goes back to their need for more size up front.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think that's all, it's interesting developments on the defensive side of the ball in a lot of these, because it is, even if it's not necessarily an official like scheme change, it does sound like a very heavy scheme makeover that is occurring there. So I think people would be excited to see that. I know I, for one, am just excited to see more weight in the front seven or front six or however many their guys are going to put it in the box, because I think it was obvious to anyone with two eyes that they just couldn't hold up against the run, because they just didn't have the tonnage of human bodies needed in order to occupy enough blockers. So enough about the current team. We're going to go to the future of the Badgers, because since we last talked, two commitments for Wisconsin, both on the defensive side of the ball. We're going to go to the edge first, where Carmelow Reed out of Illinois, a good size edge player, 6'7", 250, committed to Wisconsin a couple days ago. He had a couple pretty significant offers on his sheet: LSU, Mississippi, Michigan State, amongst others, Missouri. How does he fit in with what sort of the vision for the defense is in the future? And where does the rest of the edge class sort of stack up after him?
I would say my biggest takeaway from the Carmelo Reed edition is that like we've heard the defense kind of talk about like the past 2 years, like like they'll start a new season, or like after a bye week they'll be like, oh, we need to do this, like this is our solution, we need to do this. And like it doesn't always stick or materialize, but the very outspoken offseason commitment to size and to making the defensive line bigger, this is a sign that this isn't just like that this isn't just temporary. This is something that they foresee as part of their program moving forward. Size is going to be requirement to line up on the defensive line going forward. And this is also this is a guy with a lot of raw talent, a lot of a guy that they're trusting him to develop, and they're trusting themselves to develop him at the same time. And this is one of those additions that a lot of big time programs make, just like guys who are athletic but don't totally have it all together, who can who the coaches see something in, and then who the coaches trust themselves to develop.
Yeah, I think that it's that physical upside versus, I don't want to say like football IQ or whatever, not, or technique, but it's, there's only so much you can do if you don't have the requisite physicality. And if you have that physical upside, I think coaches are always going to believe in themselves and believe that, yeah, they can coach anyone. That's what they do, right? That's their job, is to maximize the physical talent of the player. So I think that he is a really intriguing prospect just because of that size. Now, I'm curious to see sort of how he fills out. He's listed at 250 right now, I want to say. Is he someone that bulks up to a Corey Walker, 290, 295, 300, and can keep a quick twitch? Now, that's something that obviously we don't know, and only time will tell. But I think that's going to be the biggest thing. If he's really going to stick, and like you said, like if they're not just paying lip service to having heavier edges, but it is going to be a foundation of the defense moving forward, they're going to need to get guys like this. They're going to need those bodies, whether it's Jalen Williams from this past class is a perfect example of this type of body. Another Illinois kid, Reed here. And I know they're going after more targets who have that same physical profile. It's at least a very intriguing indicator of what they are prioritizing moving forward. The other thing that the staff is clearly prioritizing moving forward is the state of Indiana, because Wisconsin now has 3 of the 4 commitments from the 2026 class from the Hoosier State. Most recently, Carsen Eloms, the cornerback out of Fishers, who the number 7 player in the state of Indiana. So he joins Tayshaun Bardo and Benjamin Novak as I guess we've got the 3 Wisconsin Hoosiers for this class so far. And but the first defensive back here for this class, what do you like about him, Donnie? And how do you think he fits in? Is he going to be a slot? Is he going to be out on the boundary? How do you think he's going to fit in here for the Haynes cornerback room?
Like you just said, I think his versatility is probably the most appealing trait about him. The Badgers are bringing in a lot of real versatile defensive backs, and I feel like in both this class, or mostly last class, and they kind of have the mindset of like we'll bring them in and then we'll figure it out. And this feels like another example of that. I can maybe see him more just because of his size, maybe more like boundary corner or in the slot. I would say it depends. Like his ability to tackle, I feel like is something that I'll have to keep my eye on, especially for the young corners. But the thing that I like most about this edition, or the thing that my biggest takeaway from it, was the Paul Haynes aspect of it. Because after this past offseason, after we saw that mass exodus of, I think it was a 23 class of corners, who just I forget how many guys, like, yeah, everyone left. Yeah, 6 guys left. And, after that, I mean, like, Badger fans, we wondered a lot of things. We assumed a lot of things. This didn't feel, like it was in line with the way some of the guys on the defensive front were leaving. They were kind of citing the size issue. Like they were talking about that. This felt a little bit different. And I was genuinely concerned that Paul Haynes, like, there's something that we don't know about Paul Haynes, or he's like, or there's like, his personality just isn't the right fit for these guys. And so to see, Eloms, and to read what he said about, being in Madison, and to talk about the rapport that he and Haynes have developed, that was the biggest thing for me. That was something that kind of like helped to reinstate my hope in him, and reinstate, because the cornerback, the defensive back room, like that's something that Fickell, has had a lot of success in the past with guys like Sauce Gardner, this guy and it's clearly a very important part of his defense. So that was one of those like non-negotiable, like, either like if this Paul Haynes issue is real, then, we have to address it. But he seems to have recovered somewhat well.
I think there was definitely a lot of concern about that, because the DB room was just so thin, and it didn't make a ton of sense. I think he's definitely intriguing prospect. I forget if it was you or John who had the comp to him as Jay Harper on the current roster, and I think that's a really appropriate comp for someone who has that versatility and enough size to play kind of wherever they need him to. So I am, I think it's obviously a good pickup for them. And I think that, Pat Lambert's roots in Indiana are really starting to pay dividends on the recruiting front, as, obviously it becomes a state of more and more import for the staff. So obviously the lesson we're going to talk about here, though, which, speaking of importance in a recruiting class, quarterback's always the number one thing. Top target, or maybe top target, we don't exactly know. We think it's Ryan Hopkins, just got a 4th star from Rivals. He's still set to come on a visit this spring. He looks like priority 1A, but there's a couple other guys who they have kicking around, whether it's Travis Burgess or Brody McWhorter. So what's the latest with Hopkins in the QB situation?
Well, in terms of quarterbacks, like Burgess was the guy that we saw, I believe on Tuesday, saw him walking around the field, spinning a football, got a good look at him. I would say when it comes to quarterbacks, it's like, there's kind of 2 directions that they could go. I think Burgess provides more athletic upside. You know what I mean? Like a lot of his highlight plays like really jump off the screen, and it feels a little bit more like Longo-ish to an extent. You know what I mean? Like that sort of quarterback mindset. Sorry to invoke his name. But Hopkins does feel a little bit more, more fitted for Grimes' system, I would say, from what I've seen of him so far.
To me, see, Hopkins is a classic Chris quarterback. Like when I see Hopkins, I think I see someone that Paul Chryst would have just absolutely adored. That's the kind of quarterback I see him as, and that is not a slight at all.
Yeah.
I just think that like the way that he plays the game, you could see the way that Chris sort of runs his offense and the way that he progresses through the field. Like I saw Hopkins, I was like, oh, this is exactly the kind of guy Chris would have been recruiting a decade ago.
I mean, it's really funny to imagine Chris recruiting a guy from modern day, but but I know exactly what you mean. I know exactly what you mean. He has that more kind of like old school Wisconsin, like he'll get the job done. You just feel more, he seems more polished, I would say.
Yeah, he seems more, and I mean, he's more of an old school pro style, drop back, go through the progressions. Not the same. I think Burgess is boomer bust. Like, definitely we've seen. I mean, he's got that crazy athleticism, but he's also got, he definitely doesn't have the polish of a Hopkins.
Yeah, I mean, and again, that is all up to. That seems more like it's going to be up to Grimes and Guyton, and that's a big thing. Like this is like the first real like quarterback test for them. Like we could talk about the transfer portal, but I don't know. That's a little bit different, at least to me. Like, and this is something where Kenny Guyton, them picking up switching Kenny Guyton's role from wide receiver to quarterback coach. That didn't seem like like it was out of like an abundance of optimism in him, or like it seemed more like there weren't as many options maybe as a quarterback coach, or as options that fit them. So I think this upcoming recruiting cycle will be huge for Kenny Guyton and his ability to establish. I mean, like obviously the season, how the quarterbacks play, that'll be first and foremost, but this is probably number two in terms of our ability to judge him.
Yeah, I'm. There does seem to be at least a little bit of positive momentum that way, in the way that people are talking about Guyton as specifically as a quarterbacks coach. And so I think at the time the move was pretty, not very inspiring. I was like, oh, we're promoting from within. Where's the new blood? Where's the new minds coming from? But I'm cautiously optimistic. But again, this is the time of year where I think everyone's getting cautiously optimistic because we haven't felt that pain in a while. So we'll get back to that at some point soon, I'm sure. But between now and then, make sure you are tuning in here with me and Donnie over here on BadgerBlitz TV. We're going to keep coming back at you with more reports from camp, the latest from the recruiting trail, and everything else you need to know about Wisconsin athletics. Make sure that you are signed up and subscribed to BadgerBlitz for the best message boards anywhere in the known universe. Best info from Donnie, from Seamus, from John, from the entire team, Ben. We got you covered in the Badgers Den. So like, subscribe, rate, review, unsubscribe, resubscribe, re-rate, re-review, all that good stuff. So until next time, he's Donnie Slusher and I'm Matt Perkins, and we'll see you in the Den.